Welcome back to OmniFoot TV's Joe Stormer speaking. In tonight's video is about Nicolo Barella's possible move to Newcastle United. I don't necessarily buy that he could go, that he's, that it's official, because nothing has come of it except rumors, but I've seen the rumors everywhere. They've been all over the news tab on Google. I've been searching it up, trying to figure out if there's any, credibility to it, but I can't get over the potential it has. In a world where Manchester United that is, are trying to sign Mason Mount for close to 40 million, Newcastle are trying to snag Nicolo Barella from Inter Milan, who just made it to the Champions League final and lost to City. And even though they just made it to a European Cup final, the potential behind Newcastle seems to somehow eclipse the potential that they could possibly have within the next couple of years. I just don't know how else to say it. Newcastle have become this exciting prospect. It's been good seeing them do so well. And with a couple of marquee signings in the right positions, where the ownership actually listened to the manager, which actually seems to be the case. And I've used that word twice now because I can't necessarily believe, I still struggle to believe that Newcastle are under new ownership, under new management, undergoing this change of sorts. Because I've heard all the great tales of the early Newcastle side, of the golden era Newcastle side under Sir Bobby Robson. I've watched them, but obviously I didn't get to, follow them as much as I wanted to. I watched a lot of old Premier League documentaries, of old interviews, players like Alan Shearer and David Ginola. I have a deep love affair with Ginola. He was a brilliant Frenchman. Wonderful, wonderful footballer. But I digress. Anyways, I think that Newcastle right now, that black and white strip needs players of that magnitude again. And I would be very excited as a neutral to see that happen. As a Chelsea fan, we've always struggled to go to St. James's Park and pick up points. That's always been the case. And to actually develop a rivalry against Newcastle in that sense, and they have one of the biggest fan bases in England, by the way. To develop such a rivalry excites me. I don't look at it and feel the need to just get all grumpy about it. It is good for the league, good for the sport, and I look forward to it. Obviously, the financial magnitude of this entire ordeal is not good to a large degree, but this is seemingly where it's going, and I've said that in the last video. But again, it's another but, two sentences apart. I do believe that the current trajectory that Newcastle are on actually could eclipse City's in very little time. Because if any of my viewers, any of our viewers here on OmniFoot have followed Manchester City's early rise under Sheikh Mansour, you will have some idea as to how much time it took them to really just get the gears moving. It took them time to get the right managers into place. It took them time to get the right kind of players. It took them time to develop that pull factor. It took them time to become this potential-based club that had that in it, that had that potential in it to move forward and become what we see it today. Newcastle don't only have that as a certain promise, it's already flourished, and we haven't even tapped the surface yet. We're talking about a club whose ownership have more than enough money to buy the entire league. I don't think any of us understand that. I don't think any of us would know what to do with that kind of money. And I think that signings like Barella, I think that if somehow Newcastle were to look at Serie A, and I mentioned Serie A in particular because I don't know if you guys have followed specifically how well players have been doing from the Italian league on the international stage throughout the last World Cup and the last Euros. It hints that the league has been underappreciated to a certain extent. And it's obviously going to be, Serie A is not the same as it used to be. It's fallen under the radar a bit. It isn't making as much money. The marketing is different. The advertising is different. The broadcasting rights, there have been a lot of struggles for Italy. They've lost a lot of money. The league does not have the same credibility, the same magnitude, the same level of importance that it used to have to players. It doesn't present itself with the same level of options. It's not a good thing. It's not something I'm happy about. I like that the Premier League is improving. I like that we get to see this from a club like Newcastle. But, it's also a double-edged sword. when Champions League finalists Inter Milan actually have to figure out a way. That's another if, by the way. It's not a when, it's an if. Let me just correct myself because, again, this news is not concrete, but I just love the idea, the potential behind it. If a club like Inter would have to sit down with Barella to convince him as to why a move to Newcastle is not right, is not on the cards for him, or should not be on the cards for him, then we have something here. We have something here that's askew. You know? Something isn't right here. If they would have to sit down with him and tell him, you can't go to Newcastle United. A couple of years ago, Newcastle were languishing in the Championship, coming back up to the Premier League, getting relegated again, and going through that cycle for not a couple of decades, but for most of the past decade and a half, for the most part. They haven't really done much. But Newcastle, unlike City, like I said, have more potential. They have more potential in regards to their fan base. They have more potential in regards to almost every area, every asset of the state of their every asset that the club in and of itself now owns. They have more potential there. They have more of an overarching thematic level of control. They command more respect. They command more credibility. They have more history, or they had more history than City do now. They have a bigger fan base, and I think the fan base is much more important than anything else. I think the fan base is much more important than anything else in our sport. And I can easily bring up another club who have that same, who bring about that same aura, that same atmosphere. I usually compare them to Liverpool, and it's Leeds United. If Leeds were under that kind of ownership, and I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with how dominant Leeds were back in the 70s and 80s, but if you are, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. And for that to possibly be where we could see Newcastle, it would be good for the sport. It would be good for them as a club. It would further push the city in and of itself, in Tyneside in and of itself. Newcastle itself is going to it's going to blow up. It's going to come back to life. That club is home to some of the most passionate fans in the country. It's home to some of the most passionate football fans I've ever seen. And seeing them do so well this past season, barely even scratching the surface, mind you, is still hugely positive. And this is more than I can say for the first couple of seasons that City had to deal with under Sheikh Mansour's ownership. So if a move for Nicolo Barella is on the cards, then I personally welcome it. But if it's not, then I really wonder who they're going to go for next. And that's it for tonight's video. I just wanted to share my thoughts on this, share my thoughts on how much potential it had, share my thoughts on the overall context of the situation. Please leave a like and comment, let me know what you think. Thank you for tuning in once again to OmniFoot TV, and I will see you next time in Whistleblowers.